was obviously a giant of unusual proportions. A giant then, a giant now, and a giant really in all the time in between. We're going to try to understand what was so unique about this giant among all the other greats of Jewish history, that his legacy is still so important today. And most importantly, what can we learn from it that truly makes a difference to all of us in our lives and to the world we live in? To illustrate perhaps how much of a giant, shall we say, Rambam really was, this can help a little bit. And I'm going to share a slide here where we will see something unique. How many sages do we know are memorialized in this way? You have here schools named for Maimonides, at least 4 schools today around the world. Hospitals, today there are at least 2 hospitals in New York and in Israel named for Maimonides. Postage stamps, currency, you name it, there is something there commemorating this great man. Even a Spanish stamp, and of course Spain is where Maimonides was born. So what is so unique? What causes this kind of memorialization of such a great rabbi out of everyone else? In fact, you could see this even more dramatically if we have a look at the Rambam's tombstone. Rambam's tombstone reads uniquely as follows. Mi Moshe ad Moshe loikom k'Moshe, from Moses until Moses, meaning from Moshe, the first Moshe, Moses, who gave us the Torah, until Moshe, whose Rambam's name, Moshe, no one arose like Moshe. So Rambam lived, let's say, 2,500 years after Moshe. But somehow, out of all of our leaders, out of all the great people in between, there's a statement made, which is often quoted and cited, that there was nobody from the original Moshe till this Moshe, nobody quite the same. Why is that? How is that? And what does that really mean? So we might want to start with a poll. If you'd like to take your votes, it might be a little bit of fun. We're going to poll, where you can all see the questions now. How did Maimonides get his name? Is it that he came from the town of Maimon? Was his father's name Maimon? Is Maimon Greek for great one? Or did he write a Talmudic work by that name? Anybody want to vote? You can vote by clicking on it. You don't have to tell me. So I see some votes for number 4. You can actually click on it on your screen and watch the percentages change. Any other votes? The great one is winning. Any other opinions? So I'm going to have to say some opinions too. The reason I ask this question, which is a trick question, is to demonstrate that on the one hand, we know a lot about Rambam, about Maimonides, but on the other hand, we don't. Because the correct answer would be that his father's name was Maimon. So there's so much out there, but there's so much that we still have to learn, even just beginning from Rambam's biography. Now that we had fun with the poll and trying to see the background of his name, let's actually look at a little video clip, which will give us, in a beautiful way, the biography, a brief biography of this great man, and then we'll be ready to discuss it and really get into it. Here we go.
In the spring of 1138, Jews in the southern Spanish city of Cordoba were preparing for Passover, the festival of deliverance. But the household of the esteemed rabbinical judge of Cordoba, Rabbi Maimon was celebrating a delivery of another kind. Just one day shy of Passover, the rabbi and his wife welcomed their eldest son, whom they named Moshe, Hebrew for Moses. Little did the rabbi know that he was destined to gain eternal fame through Moshe. For his brilliant child.
Sorry.
In the spring of 1138, Jews in the southern Spanish city of Cordoba were preparing for Passover, the festival of deliverance. But the household of the esteemed rabbinical judge of Cordoba, Rabbi Maimon, was celebrating a delivery of another kind. Just one day shy of Passover, the rabbi and his wife welcomed their eldest son, whom they named Moshe, Hebrew for Moses. Little did the rabbi know that he was destined to gain eternal fame through Moshe. For his brilliant child grew into the universally acclaimed scholar known as Moses Maimonides, or Moshe, the son of Maimon. It was a trying time for the Jews of Spain. The Almohads, a fanatical Islamic movement bent on establishing a caliphate, were gradually overrunning the Iberian Peninsula. Countless Jews were murdered. Others were forced to convert, while many families fled Spain. Maimonides was 10 years of age when his family was forced to flee. They settled in Fez, Morocco, where his brilliant father shaped him into a Talmudic scholar of repute.
He also mastered what we call chokhmah, which is the universal wisdom of humankind. He knew the works of Aristotle and Plato and the Islamic interpreters and so on.
Maimonides also became an expert in astronomy and medicine. In 1165, the family journeyed to the land of Israel, but unable to settle, they continued to the large Jewish community of Cairo, where Maimonides married and settled down. He then devoted a complete decade, approximately from 1168 to 1177, to producing his crowning literary achievement, the Mishnah Torah.
He was an ish halacha. He was the greatest rabbi of the Middle Ages. He wrote the greatest law code in all of Jewish history, the Mishnah Torah. He was an absolutely outstanding master halachist.
For the first time since God gave the Torah at Sinai, the entire body of Jewish law would be codified in a systemic, clear, and concise fashion. The 14-volume masterpiece created a powerful impression across the Jewish world. Then, in 1177, tragedy struck. Maimonides' brother, David, drowned when his ship, fully laden with merchandise, sunk in the Indian Ocean. The brothers had shared a deep bond, and Maimonides grieved terribly for years. David had also been Maimonides' business partner, and this calamity meant financial ruination for Maimonides, who was now forced to become a doctor. His expertise soon caught the attention of the Egyptian ruler Sultan Saladin, who appointed Maimonides to the position of royal physician. Maimonides also served as the leader of Egyptian Jewry. He juggled his time between his royal duties, treating private patients, serving as a statesman for the Jewish community, teaching Torah, and discussing medicine, philosophy, and science with his non-Jewish audiences. Maimonides described his schedule in a letter to a dear student, Rabbi Samuel ibn Taban of Provence.
I live in Fastad, and the Sultan lives in Cairo. I must see him every morning to check on his health. As a rule, I am in Cairo early each day, and even if nothing unusual happens, by the time I get back to Fastad, half the day is gone. When I come home, my foyer is always full of people, Jews and non-Jews, important people and not, judges and policemen. I apologize and ask that they should be kind enough to give me a few minutes to eat. That is the only meal I take in 24 hours. Patients go in and out until nightfall. And sometimes, I swear to you by the Torah, It is 2 hours into the night before they are all gone. I talk to them and prescribe for them, even while lying down on my back from exhaustion. On Shabbat, the whole congregation, or at least the majority of it, comes to my house after morning services, and I instruct the members of the community as to what they should do during the entire week. We learn together in a week fashion until the afternoon. This is my schedule.
His quill hardly saw any rest either. Jewish communities from distant lands sought his advice and rulings on Jewish law, and Maimonides felt compelled to pen yet another literary masterpiece to forestall a developing crisis in Jewish faith. Many Jewish scholars in the Arabic lands had been swept up in the newfound Islamic obsession with Greek philosophy. This left some Jewish scholars deeply disturbed by the apparent intellectual contradictions between contemporary Greco-Islamic philosophy and various precepts of the Torah. In 1191, Maimonides published a treatise that thoroughly addressed these issues from a philosophical standpoint under the title Guide for the Perplexed. When Maimonides passed away in 1204, the entire Jewish world mourned his passing. An epitaph without historical parallel was carved into his gravestone, proclaiming that since the days of Moses, no Jewish leader's achievements had rivaled that of Moses Maimonides.
So this is certainly a very great personality, and certainly somebody that we should be taking an evening to discuss. But why are we doing that right now? Why is it tonight, or right now of all time, that we're discussing the Rambam, Maimonides? Well, the answer to that is the Siyum HaRambam, the conclusion of the works of Maimonides, and that's the annual cycle that we're going to talk about a bit later of studying his works, which we just finished a few days ago. And in celebration of that, we're really doing this discussion. So now that we know a little bit more about Maimonides' life, we're ready to look at his works and his writings, and along the way also get a deeper, more up-close understanding of his life and his accomplishments. Just as a word of introduction, I will sometimes use the term Rambam and sometimes Maimonides. Rambam is his traditional Jewish title. Rambam is an acronym for Reish, Rabbi Moshe ben Maimon, son of Maimon, which in the popular English version is Maimonides, but I'm actually more used to calling him Rambam. So you'll often hear me say that, but it's the one and the same individual. So let's look at some of the Rambam's works, and let's start with his general works. In other words, works that are not uniquely Jewish, at least not limited to Jewish people, and those would be his works on medicine. So Rambam, we know, was a physician, a master physician, and although he started on it later in life, he became the physician to the Sultan Saladin, who was famous for leading the Muslims against the Crusaders who were coming into Israel and Jerusalem at that time. There is a legend even, and I don't know if there's a historical basis for this or not, but it's just interesting on his own, that Saladin's rival, who would be the English king at that time, Richard Lionheart, also wanted Rambam's services as a physician and tried to induce him to come over to London, which Rambam did not do. Whether or not that is accurate, I do not know, but it does speak for the legend that surrounds Maimonides' name. So we know that he was a physician and such a great physician, and we know that in the Rambam's law code, which we'll discuss soon, where he talks about Jewish law and ritual and practice, he actually includes 2 chapters about a healthy lifestyle. But it's less known that Rambam wrote numerous medical works. And I'm no doctor and no pre-med student, none of that. But reading up a little bit on these works and on Rambam's contributions in these writings tells me that he was way ahead of his time, and there's still a lot of modern relevance to the things that he wrote. Let's look at a list of his medical writings. something actually right out of Wikipedia. So there's some discussion about whether there are more or less, whether this is all accurate, or whether these were all written by Maimonides or not. But this is the general assumption that these are the works of Maimonides on medicine. And just looking through these titles gives us an idea of the breadth, the extent of this. It's about 10 or 11 books here. The Art of the Cure, which are extracts from Galen's writings, which Rambam greatly respected. Commentary on the aphorisms of Hippocrates, medical forms of aphorisms of Moses, who of course is the Rambam himself. Treatise on hemorrhoids, treatise on cohabitation, treatise on asthma, treatise on poisons and their antidotes, regimen of health, which is really a lifestyle, healthy lifestyle book. Discourse and explanation of fits, again, where Rambam talks about healthy living. Glossary of drug names, which is a pharmacopoeia of drugs and medications. So just looking through this without the medical knowledge, we see that this is somebody who mastered the length and breadth of the field of medicine and wrote all these contributions, which were translated only, as you see the dates here, in the 80s and 90s, because of the continued interest in all of these works. So when it comes to medicine, we know, and that's the reason why there are hospitals named for Maimonides, and there's the well-known prayer or oath of Maimonides for the physicians, and many other such lasting elements of his medical legacy because of his great contribution in that field. Now then let's look at his philosophy. And again, if you use Wikipedia and you just look up Maimonides, they simply list him as a philosopher. I don't know why they decided that that's the most important part, but they did. So if Maimonides is a philosopher, what exactly is a philosopher of the philosophy of Maimonides all about? So looking here at, looking at some of the things we saw, we talked about we saw it in the video where he was an expert in Greek philosophy along with its Islamic interpretation. But the crowning achievement, the real peak of Maimonides' philosophy, and a really bold move on his part, is his masterpiece known as Mora Nevuchim, Guide for the Perplexed. To see what that is, let's look here. This is the title page of a Hebrew version of Mora Nevuchim. This is probably a first or very early print of that. Now, I mentioned Hebrew version because the book was not written in Hebrew. The book was written, like almost all of Maimonides' books, in a Jewish dialect of Arabic, which was spoken very widely among Jews at that time. Rambam wanted these books to be accessible and not to be limited to a Hebrew readership. Now, the book Mora Nevuchim, Guide for the Perplexed was written, as Rambam himself explained, for a certain genre of people. For scholars, people studying Jewish religion and Jewish teachings, but also interested in the Greek philosophy and the prevalent Islamic philosophies of that time, and therefore troubled and concerned by possible inconsistencies between Jewish teachings and these philosophical works. A lot of young Jews struggled with this at that time. Philosophy, Greek and Islamic philosophy, was very widespread. That was the way to approach life and approach the world. And they had trouble reconciling these different ideas and these different ways of thinking. So Rambam stepped up to the challenge, writing this book where he explains and details foundations and precepts of Judaism and Jewish practice philosophically and reconciles them with all these philosophical ideas, the ones that at least he felt were significant. This remains to this very day a classic work of Jewish philosophy and a classic work of philosophy in general. Now, let's take note of something that may or may not be shocking, and that is that this work of Rambam of Maimonides was not without controversy. During his lifetime, and especially shortly after his lifetime, there were those within the Jewish community, including many great rabbis, particularly Ashkenazic European Jewish rabbis, who were concerned by Rambam's philosophical works. They felt, for one reason or another, they were a break with Jewish tradition. And there was a campaign actually waged against his work. And we once talked about this some years ago in a class, and this actually came to the point where at one point in France, not too many years after Rambam's passing, his books were burned. Burned because of other Jews who felt that his philosophy was not what they were used to, was not in line with the Torah. Now, of course, that was incorrect. The greatest sages of that time came to Rambam's defense and demonstrated what has remained the consensus to this very day, that no, the Rambam's teachings were 100% in line with Jewish tradition and the Torah, and he was actually bringing them out to the young people of his time who needed them in philosophical terms. What this does tell us, the Rambam was bold, and he wasn't afraid to buck the trend and to write a book and take an avenue and a style that would be philosophical and even contemporary philosophy of his time, might sound foreign to other rabbis, but to do what was necessary to help guide those struggling people. And finally, we reach Rambam's other Jewish works, including a masterpiece, which was his first work, and that is what you see right here, the Pirush HaMishnah, is commentary on the Mishnah. Rambam completed this. This is a manuscript of it from still within his lifetime. Rambam completed this commentary at the age of only 30 years old. This is still studied widely to this day. And we'll be able to talk about what the Mishnah is in a little bit, but to understand that this is the foundational text of the Talmud. And what Rambam did is go through all of that text and elucidate that and make it understood to the regular person. And this is something which is unique about the Rambam, because again, this book, like most of his other works, he wrote in Arabic. He wrote it for the masses. It wasn't about writing for a scholar. Scholars are examining these works and the wisdom within them till this day. But Rambam was writing for the regular people that they should be able to learn and know and understand. And this is what makes it so special. Rambam was there with the ability to address the needs of his time, to address the needs of his community, to address the needs of his people at their level, at their point, and talk to them in their language. And in fact, when you read Rambam's works as they're translated today, they still read clearly as an easy flow, although he's talking about scholarly topics. Rambam had that unique ability to bring something down to everybody's understanding. And before we move on to the Mishnah Torah, the Rambam's masterpiece, the Rambam's most famous and most important work of all of Jewish law, there is another important type of writings of Rambam that we have to discuss of great historical significance. Now, again, if you use Wikipedia, here they missed the point, because they list Rambam's Jewish works, and then kind of as a side note also mention that he wrote many tshuvot, many letters on Jewish topics and ideas. Now, tshuvot is responsa, is an important idea in Jewish history, where rabbis and great sages of all times, particularly in the last millennium, wrote and addressed concerns, questions, issues that came up in their time, and particularly the observance of Jewish law. And they become a treasure trove of how to actually apply the law and the teachings to daily life today. They also teach us a lot of history along the way. There's a lot of incidents, a lot of historical occurrences that are addressed because the need the rabbis had to respond to what was going on and to the challenges of their time. But Rambam has some lengthy such letters, And these are actually essays of tough sort on critical topics that he wrote as needed in his time. Famously among them is a letter known as Igeret Taimon, the letter to Yemen. Now, what's the letter to Yemen? Of course, we know Yemen as a country in the Arabian Peninsula, a place with a terrible civil war. But Rambam was writing to the great Jewish community, the historic Jewish community that was in Yemen for thousands of years, who were going through a terrible crisis at that time. There was a lot of challenge within and without the faith, and at multiple events that challenged the community and their basic dedication and understanding of Jewish faith, culminating in a false Messiah. So some fellow gets up and declares himself the Messiah, tries to garner a following, and creates so much confusion among the masses as to what's right and what's wrong. And Rambam wrote them a lengthy letter clarifying their questions, demonstrating why this false Messiah was nothing to be confused about, and really setting them straight. He, in fact, by writing this and setting the record straight and clarifying all this, effectively saved this great Jewish community. So grateful were they that they added the Rambam Maimonides in the Kaddish prayer. So you may be familiar with Kaddish. The Kaddish, we say it in all the prayers each and every day, whenever there's a minyan in the synagogue, and it's also said in memory of those who passed on. And we say, may God's name be praised, and the Moshiach should come speedily in our days. Well, they used to say, speedily in our days, and the days of Rabbi Moshe, the son of Maimon, the Rambam. That's how esteemed he was in their eyes after the guidance that he gave them. But there is another letter called Igeres Hashmad, the letter of those who left the faith, which speaks to the Rambam's greatness and really empathy for the challenges people went through. Because we watched in the video about the Almohads, about rampaging extremists who would say Islam or the sword. Rambam and his family fled before that. But many Jews in North Africa, under pressure, under penalty of losing everything or perhaps even their life, outwardly converted to Islam to survive the hordes of these terrorizing extremists. Well, they outwardly converted to Islam, and then they went home and continued to do their best to practice the Jewish faith. At that time, there was a well-known rabbi who wrote a scathing letter about these Jews, saying that they had left the faith and their practice of Judaism was no longer valid, was useless and purposeless, because God was angry at them and rejected them for their act of succumbing and, outwardly accepting Islam. This, of course, brought devastation to these many Jews who were in this situation, who tried at risk their own lives to maintain a connection, and here they're being told that it's all worthless. When Rambam heard of this, he was enraged. He wrote a lengthy, passionate letter where he tears into those who would dare speak negative of the good-hearted people trying their best, and clarifies what's important for us to remember till this very day, that a Jew is a Jew and will always be a Jew, no matter what will happen in between. No matter even if they do the greatest mistake and succumb to at least outwardly changing their faith, they would still remain a Jew. Their mitzvahs still remain precious to God, and nothing can ever change that. And that was not only a scholarly masterpiece and setting the record straight for all time, but spoke to Rambam's understanding of people, understanding of these individuals and their situation. Finally, we come to the Rambam's crowning achievement, what we study till this very day, and what makes the Rambam so central in the Jewish world, and that's the Mishnah Torah, the Rambam's Magnum Opus, the Rambam's primary work. This is a 14-volume work. We saw some of it before in that clip, transcribing for the very first time in all of history all of the laws of the Torah. Now, it's difficult to really appreciate what this means and the magnitude of it without background in Talmudic law and how it works. Because it sounds like somebody was a great scholar, he got up, he wrote an encyclopedia or a very extensive work, and that's wonderful. But it's really so much more than that. Something so much more powerful. Let's try to explain what was so special about this and why it remains so special till today. Really, the best explanation for the purpose and the achievement of the Mishnah Torah of Rambam's primary work comes from Maimonides himself, comes from the author in his introduction. He writes a lengthy, detailed historical introduction in a very clear, easy to read fashion, talk about the history of Jewish law and tradition, detailing its transmission from Moses until his time, and clarifying why it was necessary to write his work and what it achieves. But that's going to be a little bit long for us to read now, while I do encourage you all to read it. It's fascinating, it's important for Jewish history, and is available in English. For us here right now, let's try to understand what is so unique about this work. First of all, there is no other such work. There is no other book or set of books in Jewish history, in all of the thousands of volumes by hundreds and hundreds of sages of people of the book, numerous books and writings of every kind. There is no other work that includes all of Jewish law. The code of Jewish law, as we know it and we use it, only refers to very practical law. The Talmud doesn't cover all of Jewish law, and definitely not the Bible itself. There is only this one work of Maimonides which covers every single field and every single area of Jewish law. That tells us something about how difficult this was and how unique. Let's read subsections of Rambam's introduction, with explaining it along the way, and try to understand what this gift he gave us really is. So this is the cover page of an early edition of the Mishnah Torah, and you see the history on the side here. It took Maimonides 10 years to author the Mishnah Torah. The work was completed around the year 1180. And the Mishnah Torah was written in Hebrew. This is the only book Rambam wrote in Hebrew. Apparently, this was meant to be a part of the great tradition of Jewish scholarship, and not only for his time, so he wrote that in Hebrew. Here we have some of the Rambam's introduction. This is how he begins. The mitzvot given to Moses on Mount Sinai were all given together with their explanations. So we talked about this in the past, about the oral tradition. And I'm actually going to share onto the chat of this text, of this class, a class I gave specifically on this idea called Did the Rabbis Make It All Up? Explaining the idea of the oral tradition and all the information we have that's not written in the Torah itself. But not to get into that all right now, the mitzvahs given to Moshe were given with explanation. Much more information which is not written in the Torah, and that's how we know how to actually live by the teachings of the Torah. Moses, our teacher, personally transcribed the entire Torah before he died, as the Torah itself records. He did not, however, transcribe the explanation of the Torah. Instead, he commanded it verbally to the elders, to Joshua, and to the totality of Israel. As it says, be careful to observe everything that I prescribe to you. For this reason, it is called the oral law. So in Jewish scholarship, there is constantly the written law, the 5 books of Moshe and the Bible, and the oral law. This is the oral information that Moshe taught. That was later transcribed in the Mishnah, and finally in the Talmud. This would be generations later. Rav Ashi composed the Babylonian Talmud in Babylonia approximately 100 years after Rabbi Yochanan composed the Jerusalem Talmud. In our terms, this would be about the year 500 of the Common Era. So we're talking nearly 2,000 years after Moses. The intent of both is to elucidate the words of the Mishnah, to explain its deeper points, and to relate new teachings that were developed by each court from the era of Rabbi Yehuda until the composition of the Talmud. So Rabbi Yehuda, in the 2nd century, was the first to compile a published work of the oral tradition. The oral teachings that have been transmitted through so many generations, he made some notes of, shall we call it, in the Mishnah. And the Talmud came to detail all of that, to debate and discuss and apply all of that. Now, what's the problem? Why do we need Maimonides' help 700 years after the Talmud was completed? Here we go. The Talmud style is quite complex and is composed in Aramaic with a mixture of other languages. This language was understood at the time by the people living in Babylonia. In other places, however, and even in Babylonia itself today, this language is not comprehensible unless one has studied it. So one problem is language. There's another problem. There are only a select few who comprehend the Jerusalem and Babylonian Talmud and the other works of Midrash. They require a breadth of knowledge, a spirit of wisdom, and much time in order to truly learn from them the many laws of the Torah. So if we had the time, we could use some examples for this. But imagine I wanted to discover the laws of Torah as they pertain to prophecy. Okay, so I need to open the Torah. The Torah discusses prophecy in the section known as Shoftim in Deuteronomy. So I look it up and I read there the sections about a prophet and a false prophet. Wonderful. Then I remember that the Torah discusses Moses and his prophecy in particular in a section called Behalotcha in the book of Numbers. So I read that too. Then it occurs to me that there is further discussion of that in the story of the giving of the Torah in the book of Exodus and Shemot. So I have to read that too. But I know that everything I read in the written Torah is explained in the oral Torah. So I go to search through the Talmud for laws pertaining to prophecy. The problem is there is no volume of Talmud by the name prophecy, nor is there a chapter by that name. So I need to search through other topics for scattered references to this idea. Then I need to collect them all together and try to make sense of them. But then there are debates between different sages in the Talmud. How do I know who the law follows? Well, that depends on all kinds of rules. Who was the teacher and who was the student? Who had the majority opinion supporting them? Where are there other references to this idea that might indicate who the law should follow? And my research continues. As soon as I've done all of that with the Talmud, I have to also investigate the contemporary books that came out at the same time as the Talmud, Medrash, other elucidations of the Torah based on the oral law. And my search goes on, and I am left without an answer to my questions about prophecy. Because the Talmud was written not as an encyclopedia where you could look up an entry and find your information, but it's actually meant to study in its entirety. To know one idea, you have to study the entire work. All of the Bible, all of the Talmud, all of its associated works, analyze them all thoroughly, remember all the associated parts, and all the rules of how to apply each detail, then you might be able to construct a final bottom line. Obviously, that's not something that works for the masses, and certainly not as the years progressed after the Talmud and life actually became more difficult for the Jewish people. And here's where Rambam stepped in. Therefore, with a deep trust in God, I girded my loins, I, Moses, the son of Maimon of Spain. I contemplated all these texts and sought to compose a work that would summarize their conclusions regarding all matters of Torah law in clear and concise terms. In this way, the entire oral law could be organized for everyone without complication, to those of lesser stature and to those of greater stature. Therefore, I've called this text Mishneh Torah, meaning second to the Torah. For a person could study the written Torah and then this text, and thereby comprehend the entire Torah without having to study any other text. This is a phenomenally dramatic statement to make, and something that Rambam actually succeeded with to a great degree. So Rambam, for the first time, organized all the ideas of the Torah into 14 volumes, which we'll look at in a moment, giving each of them a title which would describe the ideas in that volume, dividing them into 83 subsections by more individualized titles, and prescribing in very clear and simple language. This is perhaps what I find most phenomenal. Rambam wrote his works almost 850 years ago. You read them today in just a basic translation, or if you can read Hebrew in the original Hebrew, and they still make sense. They're still understood. Written in very simple layman's terms for everybody to understand. This is the rule, this is the detail, this is the application. Next. It's all there. For somebody, and mind you, without Google or any other search engine, to be able to master all that information and then codify it in such a clear and concise way is truly a gift that God gave us. In fact, in many, many of our classes, we've been quoting Maimonides. And whenever we address a new topic, the easiest, the most effective way to present it is to open Maimonides' entries on that topic, and you have it right there, spelled out from A to Z. Let's look at how that works out in the breakdown in Jewish law overall. First, we get to see some of the manuscripts. So what you see here is from the Kaufman collection. This is a beautiful, artistic version of a handwritten copy of Rambam. Obviously, Rambam was originally written before the printing press. So this is one of those ancient manuscripts. But the one that concerns us most is the Huntington manuscript found in the Bodleian Library in Oxford. This is, again, a handwritten manuscript of the Rambam. We have of this only the first 2 volumes. So this is the very end of the second volume, where he says that this is the conclusion of the second volume, and he details the chapters. What's so remarkable about this is that this was written in Rambam's lifetime. This was a copy handwritten during Rambam's life with some mistakes, as handwritten copies tend to have. And the individual who wrote it sent it back to Rambam for editing, and that's what you see on the bottom. The very last line here. It says, Huga mi sifri, edited from my copy. Ani Moshe b'Rabbi Maimon. I, Moshe, the son of the Rabbi Maimon, this was edited from my copy, and he signs his name. So this is the autographed manuscript of the Rambam by Rambam Maimonides himself. This is the authoritative copy, and it's only such a shame that we don't have the rest of it, only the introductions and the first 2 volumes. But what's the story of this manuscript? Well, it went from place to place for some years until a man, Elazar, son of Prachia, had this book, had this manuscript. So many years later, I'm forgetting the time that he lived. Let's assume that is in the 14th century or so a couple hundred years after Maimonides. And he wrote in his last will and testament what you see here. It should, in its entirety, this manuscript, be placed in keeping of the Bet Din forever. In other words, the Jewish court shall hold and preserve this manuscript, and it should not become anybody's private property. That it should not be sold or redeemed, nor shall any single person ever take possession of it. It should rather be kept available so all scholars can correct their own version against it, but not read from it regularly or copy from it, but just to look up and match their versions. Rather, anyone wishing to correct his version should borrow the volume he needs from the Bet Din, leaving a bond against its value with the Bet Din until he corrects his own book and returns it. And that's what happened, because it was in this formula for some time until there was a collector who found it in the 1500s and brought it to the Oxford library, and that's where it remains, and it's available now online. Everybody can see the original manuscript. What you have here is one of the very first printings of the Rambam, as the printing press had just come out. This is 1490. In fact, Rambam was printed multiple times before we even hit 1500. This is the Santino edition. This is a historic Jewish printing house, and there's some copies of this original print still available. So if you have $200,000 that you happen to want to spend, you can buy one of those copies. It would be cute, but expensive. So now we move on to see what is exactly going on in this truly one-of-a-kind work. Obviously, we can't study all of it tonight, but we could just look at it. The first book is called the Book of Knowledge, Sefer Hamada. These are the basic things you gotta know to begin your journey in Judaism. Laws that are basic principles of Judaism. The next book is the Book of Love, because laws that talk about love of God, such as prayer, blessings, mezuzah, our relationship with God in that way. The Book of Times are laws of Shabbat and the holidays, times of the year, seasons. The Book of Women is a book of marriage and divorce and related law. The Book of Holiness. Holiness in Jewish tradition means to be separate from the mundane. Laws about forbidden sexual relations and laws about the foods that we don't eat, kosher food. The Book of Promises, laws of oaths and vows. Number 7, Book of Seeds. Seeds, agriculture. The Book of Service is the laws of the temple. Book of Sacrifices, again, how we offer sacrifices, private sacrifices in the temple. Book of Ritual Purity. Book of Injuries, this is tort law. Damages, injuries between people, theft, other kinds of interpersonal damages that need to be paid up. The Book of Accusation, laws of sale and purchase and business in that manner. Book of Judgments, other civil law. Book of Judges is laws regarding the court and monarchy, really all the ideas of Jewish leadership. So any topic you're looking for in Jewish law falls under one of these categories. Choose your volume, and it's in there. Then the Rambam breaks it down to 83 subcategories. And this is a title page of a classic edition of the Rambam. This is Hilchos Shvitat Asur, laws of the 10th day, laws of Yom Kippur. So within that book, we said Book of Times, books of dates of the year. The laws of Yom Kippur, one of those special days. Rambam tells us very systematically there are 4 mitzvahs that apply to Yom Kippur. Lishbot b'om melacha, we don't do work on Yom Kippur, just like Shabbat. So the positive mitzvah, not to abstain from work. Shelo lasot b'om melacha, not to do any work. Litanot bo, to fast. Shelo lachol v'lishtot bo, not to eat or drink on that day. And here, for the coming 3 chapters, Rambam tells us the actual details of these laws. How do we observe Yom Kippur? And the same applies to all the other 83 sections of the other laws of the Torah. So we now understand Rambam, the idea at least, of Rambam's primary work, the 14-volume master code of all of Jewish law. However, I gotta be honest, for many of us, 14 books is a lot. And the idea that it covers all of Jewish law, well, that makes it sound like even more difficult and impossible to ever relate to or get through. I would disagree. I've studied that book, the set 22 times. It can be done, and we're going to talk about that in a moment. But in case that's making you feel a little overwhelmed, let's look at a much, much shorter version of the same idea. And that's what's called Sefer HaMitzvot. Where are we here? Sefer HaMitzvot is Book of Mitzvot. Again, this is the cover page of an edition from 1870. Sefer Mitzvot is the book of mitzvot by the Rambam. What is the book of mitzvot? Well, we know that there are 613 mitzvot. What are they, though? Most of us can say, well, we keep Shabbat, we eat kosher, we do tefillin, and we start listing a couple of them. But there are 613. What are all those mitzvot? And what are the basic ideas behind them? What do you have to do? And what does it mean? Well, what if I told you that in one volume like this, Rambam codifies all 613 mitzvot, a paragraph or two for each one, not much, a page or so, telling you what the mitzvah is, where the Torah said so, what you got to do, and why. Next, you can master all of the mitzvot, the basic components of Jewish tradition, in one volume, because again, Rambam was the first one, or one of the first, to go ahead and collect them all in that way. And this one he wrote in Arabic and is open for everyone style that everybody should be able to understand. So now we get to what we talked about earlier before we conclude, and that is the cycle. We said it's the end of the cycle of study of the Rambam. What is this cycle? Well, there's a three-pronged campaign started by the Lubavitcher Rebbe in 1984. Three options you get to choose from to study Maimonides. 3 chapters of the Mishnah Torah of the 14 volume set daily. You'll finish it in a year. I've been doing that since I'm 13. Some of the chapters, I actually read them and I know the words that are going to come next because I read them so many times. But I got to be honest, some of the chapters are a bit more complicated. I don't quite remember them, and it's good to be reading them again every year and refreshing that. One chapter, if you do just one chapter a day instead of 3 because you got a full-time job plus overtime, a couple other things on your plate, well, that will take 3 years to finish. If that sounds like too much, there's also Sefer HaMitzvot, that book we just discussed, where you can get through all of the mitzvot in just a year. So, what is this cycle? Where did it start from and why? So the Rebbe explained in a talk in 1984 what he was trying to do and why he was trying to do it. We have spoken numerous times about the need to unify all Jews. This unity is even more important when considering brings us closer to redemption. So we know that being unified, loving, connected, supportive of each other causes good things, including and especially the coming of Mashiach. One of the ways to achieve this unity is when all Jews unite through studying one area of the Torah. While their mystical explanations are doing so achieves unity, when we all study the same, it has some cosmic, spiritual, Kabbalistic effect. There's also very practical. When many people study one subject, they can discuss and analyze the matter together. Although they may differ in how they understand the subject, the discussion will nonetheless lead to affection and friendship. If we're all talking about the same thing, there's a connection there, there's a relationship there, there's a bond. There's a special advantage in achieving this type of unity by studying Maimonides' Mishnah Torah, a work of Jewish law. This is the entirety of the oral law in clear and concise language. I'm going to skip this part for now. So we can have unity by reading anything together, but if we read a book that unifies all the Torah, there's another bonus there. For these reasons and others, I'm suggesting that in addition to the Torah topics people regularly study according to their individual abilities, it is worthwhile for everyone to resolve to study a daily portion of Mishnah Torah in a way that everyone studies the same topic each day and concludes the cycle on the same day. 5744 is the Hebrew year, 1984. That's when this began. And thousands, tens of thousands of people, and perhaps more, are doing this every year since. It takes a little bit less than a year, and some Jewish years have an additional month. So we are now beginning, just this Friday, we began the 40th cycle of studying all of this amazing work. The Rebbe encouraged that we should celebrate the conclusion of these works, of this cycle each year, as we do every Simchas Torah when we finish the reading of the whole written law. And here you see the first celebration of the Siyum in 1985, as it was held in Cairo. In Cairo, in Egypt, the first celebration. First time that all of the book was completed. And in the Rambam synagogue, they managed to get together and hold a celebration. In fact, there's a story behind that. And for those of you who are not tired yet, after I've been talking for an hour, we have this clip to tell us the story behind that, and then we will wrap up. Got to play too. Let's try it again. So it's a little frozen there. So we are going to continue in the meantime. And continuing means to talk about the very end of Maimonides and the very beginning. In other words, to hold our own little celebration of conclusion and beginning of Maimonides. The very end of Maimonides is a discussion of the laws of the Mashiach. And in its very last chapter, which I can't bring up right now because the slideshow is frozen, time to replace this computer. The very last section, the very last words of Maimonides, here we go, are here. In the era of Mashiach, there will be neither famine nor war, neither envy nor rivalry, because what's good will flow in abundance and all the delights will be freely available as dust. The occupation of the entire world will be solely to know God. Therefore, the Jews will be great sages and know the hidden matters, grasping the knowledge of their Creator according to the full extent of human potential. As it says, the world will be filled with knowledge of God as the waters cover the ocean bed. So we talk about the time of Mashiach, about the good times that are yet to come. What does that mean? It means a time without famine or war, a time without envy or rivalry. And because there's so much good and so much peace, that's why we can study and grow in our knowledge of God and be better people in that way, the best we can possibly be. And should you think that this is too good to be true, well, it does sound like it, but think about the progress. This is the UN wall, the Isaiah wall, establishing the goal of they shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. No more war. Of course, that's the goal of the United Nations. Of course, they're very far from achieving that goal, but a lot closer than we used to be. It's undeniable. We're a lot closer than we used to be towards a time when there will be no war and there will be no famine because more and more food can be produced for more and more people. And there will be a time of good and peace, and the Mashiach will really clinch this for us. Let this be very soon. Of course, the Jewish tradition is that we don't just conclude a book, we start again right away. So, the beginning of Rambam, of Maimonides, is the mitzvah of belief in God. The foundation of all foundations and the pillar of wisdom is to know that there's a primary being who brings all of existence into being. All the beings of the heaven and the earth and what is between them come into existence only from the truth of this being. So, the Rambam lays down as a fundamental our knowledge of God, our understanding beyond our faith, our recognition, our logical conclusion of the existence of God is a mitzvah in and of itself, and it's the first and most critical mitzvah that there can be. This concludes our celebration of ending and beginning of the Rambam. But if you look here, we have some practical tools. This is a lot of slides to skip. Here we go, resources. Should we like to, sorry, were you not seeing that? That should be better. Don't know how that happened. So, should you like to join these important cycles, to be a part of this annual study of all of the Torah in one form or another, there are resources available for you to do this in English. If you're going to choose the easiest, most practical and accessible route, Sefer HaMitzvot, the Book of Mitzvot, You could do that in print by buying the English book. In the app, at Chabad.org's daily mitzvah app, or just online on their site. The same would apply for one chapter. If you follow these links right here, you can get the Google app or the Apple version for the Sefer HaMitzvot daily study of mitzvah app, which would come up every day. The mitzvah of that day, of course, when it's Shabbat, wait till it's after Shabbat before using an app to study Torah. The same resources are also available to study a chapter per day in English. And if you want to do the real 3-chapter version, then we got to talk privately and set something up. But we can do that too. So that concludes our discussion of Maimonides. I do want to conclude with, first of all, a preview to a course that we will do in August. You see here 5 lessons, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 5, about the time of Moshiach, which we just talked about. Redemption, puffer process, how does that happen? Gog and Magog, which talks about the apocalyptic descriptions of the redemption. Elijah the prophet, and finally the grand banquet. What is this blissful future that is promised? All of this discussion, the Jewish belief in the Mashiach and the redemption, which remains a mystery for most of us, we will address in detail beginning in August. Details to follow. Please look out for that. Of course, we will continue on Monday with our regular series, which is not quite as long as this class has been. DIY mitzvahs, do-it-yourself mitzvahs. We'll see you on Monday for that. And Wednesday, we will have the women's class continue with historic Jewish heroines, talking about the great women who made contributions in our history. I'm going to let you go if you need to and keep the live stream going. For those of you who wish to stay and watch the story, quite a fascinating one, behind the Rambam celebration in Cairo in 1985. Interesting story of the Rebbe and none other than Mubarak.
הפכתי במידה מסוימת לשליח.
Gotta get the beginning of this.
הפכתי במידה מסוימת.
Okay, we're missing the introduction. This fellow is an Israeli journalist, Yisrael Katzover, Israeli military and political journalist, very well known, who also had a close relationship with the Rebbe.
לשליח, להעברת מסרים, לקציני צבא בכירים, לאישי ממשל בכירים בישראל. אבל גם למדתי רבות והודרכתי בדרך כיצד לבטא דברים בתחומים שבהם עסקתי, תחום הביטחוני בעיקר, תחום האחר במדינת ישראל, כאשר ראיתי ברבי אדם שלא רק הוא משכמו ומעלה, לא רק שהוא אדם שבקיא בכל המחמנים ואין לי בכלל מה להיכנס ולומר את הדברים האלה, אבל בתחום הספציפי שלי הייתה לרבי ראייה רחבת טווח, גם ברוחב היריעה, גם לעומק העניינים, וגם הרבה פעמים, כל הפעמים, קדימה ולטווח ארוך. לא פעם כשפגשתי קצינים בכירים, הם אמרו לי, האיש מדהים אותנו. אנחנו לא אנשים דתיים, אבל אנחנו באים אליו, ויש לנו את התחושה שיושב מולנו, איש צבא שעבר כל שנותיו ביחידות, שמכיר את מחשבת המלחמה, שמכיר כלי נשק, שמכיר מהלכים צבאיים, שמבין במודיעין. רוחב היריעה שלו היה עצום בניתוח של הדברים, וזה גם מה שהביא אליו לא מעט קצינים בכירים. הכרתי 11 פעם במצרים. הרבה מהפעמים האלה היו פגישות גם עם חוסני מובארק. וחוסני מובארק בדרך כלל, היום כבר פחות, כי הוא לא כל כך בריא ולא כל כך עושה את זה, אבל בשנים הראשונות כשהיינו מגיעים עם ראש הממשלה, עם שר הביטחון, עם אחרים, הוא היה לוקח את העיתונאים לאיזה חדר צדדי, יושב איתם, הוא מפתח שיחה מאוד מעניינת, אישית, חופשית. ואני זוכר את אחת מהפגישות האלה, היינו 5-6 עיתונאים, והוא האיץ את השיחה, מאיזושהי סיבה הוא האיץ את השיחה. ולקראת סוף השיחה הוא קורא לי ואומר, אני רוצה שתיכנס אליי לחדר. ואני נכנס לחדר, הוא אומר לי, אני יודע מה אתה כותב, אני יודע מה דעתך, אני שומע אותך בפגישות, יש לי שאלה מיוחדת אליך. אתה יכול להסביר לי מה רוצה הרבי מלובביץ' ממני? נדהמתי. אמרתי לו, למה כבוד הנשיא מתכוון? הוא אומר, הוא מדבר נגד ההסכם איתנו, הוא רואה בנו איום שלא ייפסק גם לעתיד. למה הוא עושה את זה? מה יש לו נגדי? הסברתי לו את הגישה של הרבי. אמרתי לו, הרבי ישמח מאוד, אני משוכנע בכך שאם כבוד הנשיא יגיע לארצות הברית, אין לי שום ספק שהרבי ישמח גם להיפגש איתו, ולומר לו את הדברים האלה. אני יכול להסביר רק, וישבנו חצי שעה, והייתה שיחה מאוד מעניינת עם הנשיא מובארק, סביב הנושא של הרבי. מי הרבי? מה גישתו? קצת היסטוריה על חב"ד. מה העמדה? הייתה לו גם את השאלה שכל שאר ישראלים רבים שאלו, אז למה הוא יושב בניו יורק? הבהרתי לו גם את זה, סיפרתי לו על פעילות חב"ד בעולם כולו. זה נכנס אליו לדעתי לראש, אני ראיתי את זה במקום אחד הרבה שנים אחרי זה. קרה הרבי אמר לעשות את הסיומים, הייתה תקופה כשהתחילו לעשות את הסיומים של הלימוד של הרמב"ם, אז המארגנים של זה בארץ החליטו שהם הולכים לעשות סיום של הרמב"ם בבית כנסת הרמב"ם בקהיר, בית הכנסת שבימים אלה מושלמת עבודת השחזור והשיקום שלו בצורה יפה מאוד, חב"ד החליטו לעשות שם את הסיום של הרמב"ם בבית חב"ד, אבל היה חשש שבשל השם שיש לחב"ד והדברים שהרבי אמר על מצרים שלא ייתנו להם. שאלו אותי, אתה יכול לדבר עם מישהו? אמרתי, תנו לי, אני אחזור אליכם. דיברתי אז עם השגריר המצרי בישראל, אמרתי לו, חסידי חב"ד רוצים לעשות. אז הוא אמר, מה הם ידברו שם? הפחד היה מה ידברו. אמרתי לו, הם רוצים לעשות סיום של הרמב"ם, זה לימוד, הרמב"ם היה חי במצרים. הוא אומר, על הרמב"ם אתה לא צריך לספר לי, אני יודע רבות על הרמב"ם, אני גר בקהיר, אני מכיר את הרחוב שבו נמצא הבית, ליד השוק הכי מפורסם במצרים, חאן אל חלילי. מה הם רוצים לעשות? אני אעביר את הבקשה. אמרתי לו, אני לא יודע עם מי אתה הולך לדבר. יש לי בקשה. אם זה יכול לעלות עד לדרג הבכיר ביותר אצלכם, לנשיא, תעלה את זה. לי אין ספק שהנשיא שלכם יאשר את זאת. הוא הבטיח. אני לא יודע עד היום אם הוא דיבר עם הנשיא או לא דיבר עם הנשיא. אחרי יומיים הוא חזר ואמר, דיברתי עם החלונות הבכירים ביותר, אין שום בעיה לחסידי חב"ד לבוא ולעשות את הסיום, והסיום מתקיים, וטיפלו יפה בחסידי חב"ד, וזה רק מראה שדברים ניטעו שם, שגם במצרים וגם במקומות אחרים, המעמד של הרבי היה מעמד איתן, התחשבו בדעתו. הרוחב הגיע למצרים, הגיע לארצות הערביות אחרות,
הגיע למקומות אחרים.
Okay, so I see that everybody stuck it out to the end. I want to congratulate you, and I hope that you've enjoyed the discussion on Rambam, and that we will see you for the do-it-yourself mitzvahs for the next class on Monday, and especially for the class on Jewish on the Jewish belief in the Mashiach, as it will come in August. Now, hopefully, the Mashiach will come before then. Here I am posting the link for the class I mentioned, Did the Rabbis Make It All Up?, which discusses the oral Torah and the background of that, which will help to understand the Rambam's contribution. I will also be posting the links to the Facebook and YouTube versions of the class, and including the links to those apps which we talked about. And in the meantime, I wish you all a good night and a wonderful Shabbat. I'm going to stop the stream, and if anybody has questions, please